Hello everybody and welcome to this video, 5 things to learn from the November 2018 GCSE language exams on the AQA exam board. So as you probably know, the November 2018 resits, the results for those came out this week, and with those results came the mark schemes and the examiner's report feeding back on the exams. And I want to go through 5 things that I think are really interesting and will help you if you're doing the exams in the summer, that we can learn from the resit papers. Now, the first thing I'll say is I don't want to worry about the grade boundaries. They typically seem to be harder for the November resits, and I don't want to worry about those. So I know some of you will think, oh, I've heard they were higher or whatever, but don't worry about that. And I always think grade boundaries are not worth worrying about anyway, because you've got to do your best. It's not like you're ever going to sit in an exam and think, okay, I think I've got this amount of marks now, so I'm going to stop. You know, you're going to work as hard as you can and do your best. And I think, knowing about grade boundaries or thinking about grade boundaries doesn't help with that. So I'm going to go through 5 things. Some of them are new, some of them are interesting and surprising perhaps, and some of them are a little bit depressing in that the same mistakes are coming up that have come up before, that we've already talked about on this channel and of course from the examiner's reports in the past. So the first thing I want to talk about is paper 1 question 2. Now, as you know, this is the language analysis question, and the question asks you to analyse language, and then it gives you this part of the wording of the question. You could write about words and phrases, language features and techniques, sentence forms. And we've always made it very clear here on this channel that the keyword is could. You could write about these things. You don't have to write about these things. I think in the summer of 2018, the examiner's report pointed out that, if you're really analysing in detail the kind of, let's just say, the words and phrases and language features and techniques, you might not get through all of the bullet points. But something happened in November 2018 that was a bit of a surprise, and that is sentence forms were not a particular feature of the given lines in this source. Now, of course, the sentences in the extract were certain types of sentences. That's not to say that there weren't any sentence forms being used, but what it is to say is that there was nothing the example particularly felt was worthy of analysis in the sentence forms. And that's the first time we've seen that, because basically what the examiner's report pointed out was that students who absolutely insisted on trying to write about sentence forms struggled because actually sentence forms were not a particular feature that the writer was using for effect in the lines that were mentioned. Moving on to paper 1 question 3, which is of course the structure analysis question. And just one thing to point out here, that when we're talking about structure, a lot of the time students send me messages, what do you mean by structural devices? And of course we know some of them, flashbacks and flash forwards and the cyclical or circular structure where things begin and end in the same way. But in the November 2018 report, it made it clear that in that source there were not any of those more obvious well-known structural features. So it didn't have a flashback or a flash forward or a circular structure or a cyclical structure. And I just wanted to make this clear to those of you who are subscribed to the channel. I really appreciate you subscribing to this YouTube channel, that structure of course does include these things, but it's not just about these things, because structure is about what's happening, where and why. So it's not about what's happening, it's about where it's happening and why it's happening. So what we saw in the 2018 November exam was that it didn't have these more obvious structural features, but of course there were still structural decisions that were made by the writer. Perhaps it started by describing one thing and then alternated to another or switched to another. There was a move from character to dialogue, there was a build-up of tension throughout the whole piece, all of those kinds of things. But the point I'm making is, don't go into paper 1 question 3 just with a kind of tick list of obvious structural features that you're looking for. Yes, they may be present, but structure is wider than that. It's not just about finding these structural devices, it's just thinking about what happens where, how things are sequenced, how things shift and move and change, and the effect that that has. So don't be put off if there aren't the obvious kind of structural features that perhaps you're really familiar with. And also in paper 1 question 5, now this isn't a new thing, but in June 2018 the examiner's report pointed out that there were issues with comma splicing, dialogue punctuation and apostrophes. And I just thought it was rather depressing to read in the November 2018 examiner's report, which of course is a resit exam, that these were still the issues cropping up when it came to the technical accuracy skills of AO6. And I just want to say that there is very little that is exciting or engaging or interesting about learning, for example, how to use punctuation with dialogue. It's just kind of, you've got to learn it, and it's difficult and it's dry. A lot of grammar and punctuation can be dry. But look, if people were making these mistakes in the summer and then they went to resit and they were still making these mistakes, it's a shame, because I pointed out, in the summer that the examiner's report said about these things. So make sure you work on these areas, because these are, I can tell you as a teacher, I know these are the kinds of things most students make mistakes with. Do check out Mr. Bruff's Guide to Grammar. It covers all of them. And of course, my grammar playlist has these in it as well. So that was just a little bit depressing that it appeared again. For paper 2, not so many things that jumped out as being sort of surprising or interesting in the examiner's report. And that's not to say, by the way, that there weren't mistakes and problems. I mean, I've got obviously around 40 videos on English language paper 1 and around 40 videos on English language paper 2, and I've got my revision guide, which you can download through or buy paperback through following the links in the description. So I'm not saying there were no issues with paper 2 or there were no other issues with paper 1, but I've gone through them in my video, so I don't want to repeat myself. But what was interesting was something to do with question 1. Now, I've often said that paper 2 question 1 is not as easy as paper 1 question 1. And I think a lot of people fall into the trap of thinking it's like 2 minutes, bang, 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 tick 4 things that are true and move on. And in paper 2 question 1 in November 2018, there were a lot of mistakes. A lot of students, I'm not going to give away the specifics because some of you will be sitting it for a mock at some point, but essentially what happened was the wording of one of the statements, which was incorrect, okay, because you've got to tick 4 statements which are true. Well, the wording of one of the statements which was incorrect was very similar to something in the source, and a lot of people mistakenly thought, yes, I've seen that in the source, give it a tick. And this was not the exam board trying to catch you out. I think it's just a good time to stop and pause and to think about paper 2 question 1 as being a little bit more important than perhaps people feel that it is. Of course, it's 4 marks in the entire paper, which is, relatively a high amount of marks for, somebody to miss out on. And essentially what we're saying is, look, you've got 5 minutes to spend on this question. The lesson to take from this is to take your time with this question. I know how it feels in the beginning of an exam. It can feel like there's a lot of pressure and you want to rush through it, but you've got enough time to go back to the part of the text in question and to actually have a look and to think about the first few lines of source A again, carefully and slowly, and work your way through and pick those 4 statements which are true. And of course, as I talk about in my revision guide, some of them as well require kind of inference and working out the implicit understanding. They're not always explicit, but a massive amount of people missed out at least 1 mark in paper 2 question 1 because they made a mistake there. And finally, paper 2 question 4. This is something that I was really surprised by. A lot of students didn't even attempt to answer paper 2 question 4, and many of those who did actually wrote less for question 4 than they wrote for question 2 or for question 3. So it's really important to remember question 4 in paper 2 is worth 16 marks, and you should spend around 20 minutes on it. Okay, so don't mess up your timing so that you get to paper 2 question 4 and you look at the clock and think, oh no, I've got to quickly hurry up, I'm running out of time here. Manage your timing well. You spend around 1 minute per mark available. If you allow 15 minutes to read the sources, that gives you about 1.5 minutes per mark available if you're managing your timing and sorting out the amount of time you spend on a question based on the marks available. So paper 2 question 4 in the resit, many students wrote not very much for it. A shocking number of students wrote nothing, and my advice to you is to remember remember, this is a high mark question. It's not an easy question, but as the examiner's report pointed out, even some very simple answers to this question would gain you some marks. So if you struggle with paper 2 question 4, check out my video in the playlist for AQA English Language paper 2. I hope you found this video useful. Please do subscribe to the channel. What you'll see on screen now are some recommended videos, and thanks for watching.